a direction. That's what I'm hoping it's going to do. And some of you will click in, your mind will click depending on different things that we talk about. Okay, let's put this up on Blackboard. So remember, on Blackboard, and I'm putting it in the wrong spot. Or maybe I'm not. Okay, I don't know. But on Blackboard, each week, you're going to have at least a couple of recordings that you can look at. Worst case, if you didn't get something, or if we run out of time, I tend to go a little faster, right? So, pacing wise, if you think this is slow, you're probably right. If you think this is fast, right? This is slow for me, right? This is really slow. So if I'm going fast for you, then it's because you're just getting used to some of these things and you're getting used to me. That's part of it too. You've never worked with me before, so you don't know the pace that I go at. I can go probably at least very comfortably twice as fast as this, right? And even faster. Not because I want to, but depending on the group of students I work with, because you already get it. You got that part. So I don't have to talk about this anymore, right? I can just move on. And I'm going to do that again. We should probably introduce ourselves one more time because we're starting a new video. So welcome back. We are advanced client-side JavaScript, COMP2112 in the fall 2022 semester at Georgian. And it's week 3, part 2 of our broadcast and reporting together. And where last we left off, I feel like I'm doing role-playing. Where last we left off, our brave adventurers, right? We're going into the cave called AJAX, right? And they were going to fight some monsters together with me. Here's the monster called AJAX that maybe you've never heard of before. Anyone heard of AJAX before? Yes, some people put up their hands. Some people, yes, no, yes, no. AJAX, what is it and why do we need it? Oh, yes. Hey, Andre, thank you. I'm sorry that you hurt your back. AJAX, it used to stand for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And now we just simply call it AJAX because we don't care if it's XML. It could be JSON. It could be HTML. It could be whatever. But the idea is we're using asynchronous JavaScript. And with everything else that becomes asynchronous, when we want to load data, I want to load data from a data source, I'm probably going to use AJAX in some form or another, underlying the underpinning technologies again, just like we talked about earlier with the underpinning technologies of classes are prototypal inheritance, the stuff on the right that you saw, that ugly code, right? That was what was underneath it. And AJAX is no different. AJAX underpins everything that is asynchronous and is built into JavaScript. Okay. One thing to note is that we can use clients, which are web browsers, to load data without reloading the page. So, okay, let's talk about some uses of AJAX. This is how it works, okay? We create a XML HTTP request object. That's actually what the object is called in JavaScript, an XML HTTP request. Woo, right? It's crazy. Let's just call it the XHR object, right? Which is an easier way to think about it, XHR, all right? And this XHR object, right, is a container. That's what I want you to think about it, that I, almost like a packet that I send to the server. And I say, hey, server, take this package, this container, fill it with data, and return back to me full of data. Thank you. That's what you say, right? And we have to wait for the server to do this because the server, my friends, is going to return that data to you whenever it feels like it. Okay? If you think that it's going to return it in a specific order, you would be wrong. Hence, the asynchronous nature of JavaScript. I'm going to hammer this to you, with you guys over the next couple of weeks. And you're going to get sick of me saying it. Tom, I don't know why it doesn't work. Because it's the asynchronous nature of JavaScript, right? And it's just loading it whenever it feels like it. You cannot depend on the server doing it at a specific instant in time. You have to wait for it to load, which means it needs to be event-driven. When it finishes loading, then we want to do something, just like your page loads. You don't know when your page is going to finish loading, and that's why we're listening for it with our window at event listener load. function, right? We want to wait for the page to load, and then we're going to do something. We're going to wait for the data to come from our server, and then we're going to do something. The asynchronous nature of JavaScript. Okay. I'm going to trip you up with this again. Okay, it's going to happen. I'm telling you in advance, you're going to be fooled, and then you're going to look at me and you're going to go, I don't get it. I'm going to say to you, the asynchronous nature of JavaScript. I'm telling you right now, today, right now, and I've said it a bunch of times, and you're still going to be fooled afterwards. You won't believe it. Okay, let's move on. It's coming. Okay, don't feel bad when it happens. Okay, let's continue. All right, let's move on. AJAX. So what is it? Well, when was it used? A lot. Google was a great use of AJAX. If I did Google Maps or even a search, it uses AJAX. If I start typing in some stuff, Google's search engine, right, automatically updates the, our little edit, our text object, right? As I type, it accesses a database and it updates our choices, AJAX. All right, I don't reload the page to do that. I'm not reloading the page. I'm getting it. I'm injecting that data right inside of that search field, right? That's what's happening. So AJAX and Google search is a great example of how this works. Okay. Maps. If I want to use Google Maps and I'm panning around the page with Google Maps, how does it update that page? AJAX. It goes through, and when you need to, it basically injects the data that we want to see in real time, right? It does not reload the page. Maps don't reload for you when you move the maps around. It's automatic. It feels automatic for you. It's fooling you. It's an illusion. It's not like that at all. You're looking at only one part of its database. That's what you're doing. And as you move around, it's almost like this little window that you're moving around and looking at different places. That's what it feels like. But actually what you're doing is as you move, it keeps loading the data. And if you do it fast enough, and if you're on a slow enough system, you'll see that it'll start populating right here and there and there. That's AJAX. Little pockets, little squares, it'll start populating here and there on the map to make the map what it is. When you zoom out, it's the same thing. It just replaces the images with a larger version of the map. That's what it does. Okay, you're not really zooming out. You're replacing the images with other images. Okay, so AJAX is used for that. And the way it works is this. You're going to get used to over this course and next course with Rich. There's going to be something called a request. And you're going to send a request to the server, and it's going to return a response. This request response cycle is called, what is it called? Rich may have talked about it already. Nope, that's just a structure to do that, right? It's called a round trip. Right, this round trip to the server. So imagine if every single time I wanted to do something, I made a round trip to the server over and over and over and over, over and over and over. And the server doesn't live here. It lives someplace in the cloud, right? That could be pretty darn slow, right? We don't want to do round trips to the server as much as possible. Good example of this is validation. I want to validate as much as possible front end first before I submit my form. Why? Because if I had to do server-side validation as I'm typing, it's doing every single time you type, every character you type, it's doing a round trip. Woo, request response, request response, request response. It's really slow, right? So we want to avoid this thing, and we only want to load or get access from the server when we need it. This request response, this full trip, a round trip, right, that we have here. You're going to get sick of hearing request response this entire semester and next semester, because what it's all about, request response. And there's more examples of that. So, I mean, that's what we do. We request data from a third-party server, and we get data, back information. Another place we use AJAX is with web services, right? Typically, we might have an API key that is provided to us by, the web service, whatever that might be. And then we use that API key to identify ourselves and get data from that service. The API, which stands for Application Programming Interface, is just data, usually in the form of JSON. JSON objects, I'm hoping, yes? JSON, that's in the page itself. We can actually see the data. What we need to do on the front end is consume that data. Consume means take it, use it, and restructure it into a class of some kind, right? And typically the way it works is the data is serialized. I'm using these words, and I want you're going to get used to me using these words. I serialize data and then I deserialize the data. When I serialize, in the process of serializing the data, I put it on the server somewhere, right? And when I'm serializing it, I encode it in some way. I structure it where I have properties on one side and then the value on the other side into key value pairs, as an example, right? I serialize the data. When I load that data from a server somewhere or some other data source, I need to deserialize that data and put it into a class or some kind of object on my side so I can fool around with it. I can't touch the data, or use the data, manipulate it in any way or whatever, unless I deserialize that data into a class structure or other structure that I can use, right? So that's something we're going to learn. Serializing and deserializing. Okay, when we think about AJAX, you cannot use AJAX at all ever by double-clicking on the file. All right, so normally back maybe last semester, maybe you double-clicked on the HTML file and made it work. No, that's why I've introduced Light Server to you. Our Light Server is a small server that's running client-side, right? It's actually a Node.js server that has been prepackaged for you and synchronized with your web browser. That's what it is. So what we're going to try and do is use this server so we can perform AJAX requests. It will go out to the server, which in this case happens to sit on your machine, out to the server, it'll get your data and come back, right? That's the only way that AJAX can work. It needs a server. It requires a server to work, okay? There's other kinds of servers out there. For example, you can have an Apache HTTP server, and it could be on a different solution stack. Solution stacks, by the way, full stack developer. You hear this term nowadays all the time, right? Which is your mean stack, MERN stack, all that stuff. What is a stack? A solution stack. It is the backend database, right? And the server itself. So for example, LAMP is on a Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP stack. That's what LAMP stands for, right? MEMP, it's very rare, is a Mac, right? A Mac OS, Apache, MySQL, and PHP server. There's WAMP, which is Windows, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, and XAMPP, which is any other one. You can put it whatever you like, right? There's also Internet Information Services by Microsoft, usually used by Microsoft Azure. And there's the more popular solution stack, which is Nginx. Nginx is a server type. It runs on Linux in a virtual machine or on sites like Heroku or AWS or GCP, Google Cloud Platform, right? So one of those things. So Nginx is where we want to go. We want to kind of use something like an Nginx server in our course, if we're ever going to put it up online, or in the next course you work with Rich. Okay, it's coming. All right, so that's AJAX. It needs a server. So here are the steps for AJAX. You're going to instantiate an XHR object. You're going to use the XHR object to send a request. You're going to receive a response from the server, and then you're going to process the data. Okay, that's the very high level overview. When we send a request, we can get a response. When? When do we get a response back?
Whenever the server feels like
Yeah, I love it. I love you, man. You said it the right way. Whenever the server feels like it. You have no idea, no clue. You cannot measure it. You cannot control it. It's whenever the server feels like giving you a response. And I mean that like that. It prioritizes its responses according to its priority queue. It might have several responses dealing with at the same time, and you don't know which request it's going to respond to first. It really depends on the load, how much memory that request takes, and a bunch of other factors that you're not privy to, and you cannot even track or test. Okay, seriously, that's the way it is. It's just not possible, at least from a client-side perspective. All right, so again, we make a request, we get a response. And this time, in this case, we're making an XHR request, a special type of request, right? And this XHR request is it's getting information and coming back with data. Okay, I'm not going to go through these again. This is just for your own information. All right, so request response objects are important, as well as the uniform resource locator, the URL that you're going to use to make that response or the request. When we make an XHR request, I'm going to skip. Okay, guys, this is just for you. We're going to use an open method, and we'll talk about this. Here's something I want to talk about: HTTP, right? HTML5 is where we are right now. Okay, but HTTP, is when we started talking about 2015 was a special year. Remember, we got HTML5, CSS3, we got ECMAScript, 2015 and whatever. And we got HTML or HTTP2, which is why we called it the year of Web 2.0, right back in the day. We are now almost at Web 3.0, which is much faster under the hood. We're sitting at 2022. In this year, June of 2022, they've made a proposal. So there's a proposal that's been made by the people that manage by the W3C Foundation and so on, right? And they're trying to standardize version 3 of HTTP. When that happens, by the way, a lot of browsers already support it, like Google Chrome, especially Chrome Canary, and also Firefox. There's also a Firefox browser that also supports it as well. I believe within the next year or so, we're going to see, kind of an emergence of, what we might call Web 3.0, right? Which means that the web is going to get faster somehow, right? And you're not going to realize what's happened. Under the hood, all that's happened is the engine that runs our browsers is going to switch to a different protocol, HTTP3. It's coming. And this is going to make it so that it just appears to be a much faster thing with the same technology. You can have the same phone accessing the web, and suddenly it's going to be faster. And you're like, wow, Rogers or Bell really improved their network. No, they didn't. It's HTTP3, right? It's changed. And maybe Rogers and Bell did improve the network. Hopefully they did, right? There's two ways to make requests. We can use a GET request, and we can also make a POST request. Why do we use a GET request or a POST request? Do you have any ideas beyond what it says here about why you would choose to use one method over the other? And what is the conventions? Do you know? If you don't, it's okay. I'm going to tell you, right? GET request. Why would I use it? Why would I not? Here's where I wouldn't. If I'm sending sensitive information like username and passwords, I will not use a GET request. A GET request, security, yeah. A GET request will expose your username and passwords right on the URL. It'll actually show it, username and password. You never want to use a GET request for any kind of login, ever, right? Right? It will show. Yeah, I'm just so good. I'm glad that you know that. POST requests are usually used for that kind of thing. And I want you, for this course and for the next one, there's other requests we can make. Limit yourself to knowing these two, GET and POST, all right? So when you go to Rich's class, again, the server-side stuff that you're going to learn next semester, right? He's going to talk about GET and POST requests. For you, in your mind, when you think about GET requests, it's a request to show me the page. Show me the page, right? Display the page for me. That's a GET request. If I do a POST request, that's process the page. When I click the submit button on a login form or a login button, I'm processing that request. That's a process request. When I do a process request, I issue normally a POST request. Process, POST, display, GET. Okay, that's what I want. Except when we log out. When we log out, we issue a GET request because there is no page to go to. There's nothing to process. Okay, you could do a POST request, but there's nothing to click on to get that. All right, so those are different kinds of requests. What we're going to get when we make an HTTP request, we get some responses back. So I make a request to the server, and I'm going to get a response back. Here are the different status codes you might get. Some kind of 100 series status codes, a request received. A 200 series status codes. For example, a 200. A 200 is what we want, which means the request was successful. If we get something else, like a 300 or a 400, 4XX type, 300 normally means we got it, but we don't need to do anything else. You've already got my information. An example would be when I'm loading CSS pages. When I load CSS pages, as an example, I already have your CSS page and I load it into my cache. I don't have to load it again. So it's a 300, a 304. That's where you're going to get back, right? Where we don't want is a 404. Remember, we talked about this last week, and it stands for file not found, right? Or file not, the British not found, right? File not found, 404, right? And or something else like a 401, which is unauthorized. If you get a 401 unauthorized or a 404, that's a bad, you're going to request your response from the server is bad. Even worse would be a server error, like a 500 error. That would be very bad. That means their server crashed. right? Something like that, okay? So we make requests and we get responses back from the server in the form of codes we get back. That's what we get back. Okay. And here they are. Those are all the responses that you can get. I put them here for your viewing pleasure. These are the most common ones you're going to get. Okay, 304 is, you know what, we've got lots of them. We don't need to modify anything. 404 not found. A 401, we don't have it here, but it's unauthorized, and a 500 is an internal server error. When we make an XML HTTP request or an XHR request, right, there are a bunch of methods we need to use. But first, the first and most important one we want to use is the open method. The open method sends the method itself, the type, either a get or post type. What is the method we're going to use to communicate with the server, right? Some kind of URL or local path to your files, because it can be used also locally, right? And am I going to make this synchronous? Am I passing along user information, username and passwords? I can do all that with the open request. But in terms of, you know, completing my request, I need to do a send, issue a send as well. So there's two things you need to do. I need to make an XHR object. So in other words, let XHR equal to a new XML HTTP request and make a new object, right? It's empty. And then I fill it up with the things that I want. Here is what I need. That's the open request. And now execute, send. Okay, that's what you're going to see. That's the process that we're going to see. Okay. And then what you're going to get is a bunch of states that come back, right? There is the one state that we want to really wait for. We want to listen for this on ready state change. When the state change changes to ready, right? Or loaded 4, when the request, the ready state is 4, and the response from the server is 200, that is the perfect state for us to return data. Which means, remember, a request that's 200, if we skip up a couple of slides again, a request that's 200 is, everything is okay, right? And if I get a ready state change here on page 40 of 4, it means I've loaded your data. You've got your data down, right? I want my data because we don't know when the data is going to come to us from the server, right? So this ready state of 4 means you're ready. You got your data. Okay, nice. Okay, great. So this is how it looks. Let XHR is equal to new XML HTTP request and so on. And we can certainly go through this, but this is a waste of your time and you'll be bored to tears. Let's just do it here on the actual thing itself. So this is our first little piece of code. And this is part of your in-class exercise 2. All right, awesome. So in our code right now, we're still using JavaScript. We haven't transferred to TypeScript yet. And we're going to try and do that before the end of the day today. I want to create a new folder. Let's make a new folder. So let's click out here and we'll make a new folder called the data folder. And the data folder is where we're going to have a JSON file. Let's make a JSON file, right? Brand new JSON file. And I'll make a new file and we'll call this contacts.json. And the contact, whenever we make a JSON file, we need curly braces. Here's our curly braces, right? And typically what we might have is an array of contacts. So let's think about what that array would look like. We need a name for the array, right? A friendly name like, you know, contact list. And then followed by, remember, key value pairs, right? Followed by the array syntax, right? And a bunch of objects that look like this, curly braces, right? So we might have a contact that has a, you know, full name, right? Which might be something like, you can put your name in here, Tom, I'm putting mine, right? And let's also give it a contact number. So again, it's the property contact number, followed by the contact number itself. Let's say 416-555-5555, followed by an email address. And I'm just going to make this so it's really long, but you can see it, right? This is typical. And we'll say tom@example.com. That's a contact, right? And it's in a contact object. Look, I'm using object literal notation, object notation, right? And let's copy that a couple times and we'll change the names. So we'll copy that. Okay. We need something like this, right? And we'll just make it a couple ways. Here we go. We'll just add these things. We'll make it some other names. You can make it whatever you want. I'm going to use something like Peter Parker, right? And his phone number is, 551, and it'll be Spider-Man at example.com. And we'll use Tony Stark, just because Marvel fan, why not? Tony Stark. And his phone number is 550, and his Iron Man. You can make your own. Okay, there's a few. Are you with me? Oops. Are you with me? So again, I've got data. This is my data source. Okay, it doesn't matter where it is, whether it's locally or whether it's online, I need a data source. Right now, it's locally. And this describes the following thing. I have a JSON data. Inside of that, I have an array that's named contact list. That's what I have. Here's the name of the array. Here's the array, the square brackets. And inside the array, it's an array of objects. An array of objects. Each object is what we call a contact, right? So there's a list of contacts. That's the contact list. Are we clear? Is this foreign to you? Are you upset at me already? Because it's coming. You're going to get upset at me soon, very, very soon, right? All right, good. Excellent. I've got my contact list. You guys seem to be okay still, and you're not, having any kind of problem, right? I'm just going to close this up. We don't have to see this right now, right? Okay, I'm just going to erase this. This is just for we just talked about it last time, so you understand the differences, just so we have more room here, so we can see it. Okay, I want to load my data and I want to display it in the console, all right? So how do we do such a thing? Well, we must have some kind of method. We'll just call it, open XHR or something like that, right? We'll make a new function. We'll call it open XHR, right? And, let's just call it XHR, XHR request to make it easy. XHR request, so 2 R's. What does it need? It needs some kind of URL, right? And what else does it need? Some kind of method, right? We know that. So it's going to take a method. It's going to take a URL, and that's it for now. How about that? Something very simple. So it just needs this. So two parameters. Okay. And inside that, we're going to make a brand new XHR object. Let XHR equals to a new XML XHR HTTP request. Sorry, XHR XML HTTP request. This one. Okay. So this is step 1, right? Step 1. Create an empty XHR object. Right. That's what it does. Step 2, I want to do an open request, right? Where I say xhr.open, right? And I want to pass in the method and the URL, right? That's the XHR open request. And then somehow we want to do an XHR send. So xhr.send, and that sends it off. But even if we did this, this is kind of a step 2. So we're going to compose the request. That's what the step, the open is. It's composing the request. And now we're going to send the request. Step 3. Send the request to the server. Okay, we haven't received a response. We're just sending a request and we need to receive a response, right? So remember what we need to do. We need to set up step 4. We need to set up an event listener, right? And how do we set this up? Well, we're going to say that xhr dot add event listener, and I'm going to listen to what type I want to listen for. I want to look at gives me some information here, some options here on Visual Studio Code. We want to use the ready state change. Here's the ready state change. When the ready state change triggers, right, I want to use an inline function. We just talked about inline functions. And we're going to get some stuff, right? We're going to say that if XHR dot, and XHR comes up with a status, right? So status is a number. That's what it is. A status is a number. Remember what the status is, right? We want the status to be equal to 200, right? And we also want the XHR ready state, right? Right, to equal to what? What's the ready state? 4, right? If both of those things are true, by the way, if you really are uncomfortable writing it this way, you could be more specific. You can do something like, looks like this, if you really wanted to, just to, so you can see that there's two different conditions here, right? Okay, cool. I like that. Then I want curly braces. If both of these two things are true, that means we got both of the things we need. Those are both things. I need a, XHR status to 200, which means everything is okay, right? And I need a ready state of 4, which means your content is loaded now. Thank you very much. And what we want is we want to console log, right? Here's our console log. My XHR response text, right? I want to send that out to the console. There's my XHR request. Questions around this? This is a generic function. That's what it is, right? I can use this function to make any request. And anytime I make a request to get data, it's going to, right now, all it does is return it to the console. We're going to make it so we can use this XHR object so we can get data and return it anywhere in our code. All right. Excellent. Okay. Are you with me? Wonderful. We're so far so good. In my start function, I'm going to pass in my XHR request. Here's my XHR request, double R, right? I'm going to pass in the method that I want to use, which is the get method, right? And I want to pass in, right, the URL, which is what I want. What is the URL? Now, the URL is relative to your HTML page, not your JavaScript code. So if we look here, what should be my path to get to the data? It should be something like /, right, data / contacts.json. Okay, it should be something like that, right? By the way, there's some errors here, and I want you guys to figure it out potentially, right? Let's save. Okay, questions first before we move on. Before we try this out, I want you to tell me what you're seeing here and does it make sense to you? Does it not make sense? If it doesn't make sense, please put your hand up because it's going to ramp. This is the lowest level of stuff I need you to know. Lowest level, right here. Some people look like they have a thinking face, which means they're trying to figure out what I've done, right? Let's take a look. I got my add event listener and I've got this. Okay, how does event listeners work? How does events work anyway? How do they work, right? Remember that JavaScript has an event queue. That's what it is. It's like a big, box, all right? Every event gets raised and gets noted inside that queue. It's get listed in that queue. A queue is like its big container, right? When I press on the web page, it creates a click event, and that click event gets sent to the event queue. If I'm not listening for that click event, it's ignored, right? I'm listening for the ready state change event. The ready state change event is going to go into the event queue, right? I'm listening for it. When the event queue it happens that I get a ready state change the kind of ready state change that I'm looking for, which is a 4, right? I'm going to get a bunch of ready state changes, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember, there's a bunch of numbers. It's going to go through its steps. I receive the data. I'm playing with the data. Here it is, number 4, right? That event queue is going to be filled 4 times, not once, 4 times at least. with this ready state change. Okay. And then I'm going to output it. Let's see if it works. So again, I'm just going to go to my browser. Here's my browser, and I'm going to go back to that page that we were using. I'm just going to pull this down here so we don't have to, we're not bothered by it. And I want to go here and take a look. Here's my data. How did I do it? Right? How did I do this thing? I mean, it went through and got it. Okay. All right. Let's continue. Let's continue. Why? The asynchronous nature of JavaScript. So why didn't it? Is it the path that's wrong? You know, take a look at my code. Take a look where I put my data. Make sure that your data folder and your context.json are saved. So there's nothing, there's not a little white circle at the top. Make sure you save all your code, please. Save everything, right? Does yours work, ladies? Yes, good, good, good. Anyone else not working? What's going on? You're the developer. Tell me, what happened? Why is it not working? What did you do different than me? Right? Here's the code, here's my app, right? And here's my little function. And this little function is what I'm doing. And I want to make it like this, guys. You know why I want to make it like this? Imagine if I had to do this every single time I make a request, I got to type all this out over and over again. This is a perfect case for a little function. Functions are reusable pieces of code, right? I want to be able to reuse this code all the time and pass in different parameters, right? Okay. So this is interesting. This is nice. But what if instead of console logging the XHR response text, there's something else I can do too. I want to JSON.parse this text, JSON.parse. So if I was to do that, and if I said something like, let's try this out for a second. So if I said, let contact list equals to JSON.parse, and I want to parse that XHR text response, or response text, this one. And then I want to take my contact list console log, and I want to take the first element from my contact list because it's an array, right? My contact list, my friends, right? Well, this contact list isn't really a contact list, is it? It's the contact list file that I'm getting. It's not the contact list itself. In the file, we have a contact list here, right? That's an array. But what I do is when I return this, when I say let contact list equal to JSON.parse this data that I get back, this represents the entire file, right? So this is like the contact data. Let's put that in, contact data. And what I want is actually to go like this. I want the contact data, and I want to look at the contact list. Okay, you're going to get mad at me now. And I want to look only at that first piece of data that I want to return. Does this make sense? Okay, so remember the contact data represents the entire file. All right, actually, we can even call it, just to make it so that it's so it doesn't, let's call it data source, contact data source, right? Just to really be explicit here. That represents the entire file, the contact data source, right? And from that contact data source, I want to access the contact list. I use the .accessor method. I put the dot in there. And the contact list, if you look at it, is here, this thing, right? Which represents an array. If I want to look at the 0th element of the array, which is this one, right? Then I need to put in the 0th element here. This is the 0th element of that array. Okay. Now this is going to be data. It's not a string. Before, when we were getting the data from our server, it was response text. That's a string of data. It's not actually something we can work with. It's just a string. I want data. I want it to work with this. I want to deserialize the data that I put in my file. I serialized it in a certain way. I made it an array of contacts. I want to deserialize it, decompose it, and use it somehow. That's what I'm doing here, okay? Great. Let's see what I get now when I go back to my page. Control-Shift-J. What do I get? I got an error. Okay. So what happened? Is it a typo? Right? No, why? I don't understand. You mean, what do you mean this to see? See how easy it is to make a stupid mistake? I told you there was errors, right? It's not for any other reason because I chose contact list here, very astute, contact list in capital C, and I use lowercase c. It's very easy, right? JavaScript doesn't care. It'll try and do whatever you tell it to do, right? Let's go back and try and put that in. Let's say contact list with a capital C. By the way, there was no code hinting. Nothing told us that it was an error or an issue, right? By the way, you're never going to get a code hinting like that, even with TypeScript. You won't get something like that. Okay, let's try now. So save it and go back. And now we have this. And actually what it looks like is very different than the last piece. It's actually an object. Take a look. This is data. This is different than a string. It's actually an object. And notice what it says here, prototype. It's actually thinking about this as a little class, an object, just like as equivalent to any other object that's out there. Does it make sense? Are you confused? Right? Okay, cool. I like it. You're not confused. You're awesome already, right? That's fantastic. Let's go back. So yes, we've done this. And you know what? It'd be awesome, but it's trapped in here, right? I want to do that. And I want to use my XHR object, right? My response text. I want to use it out here somewhere or whatever. Is that possible? Can I use my XHR response text out of this event listener? I mean, I could, but what will I get? Because actually it's the object, XHR. XHR is, I defined it here. I didn't define it in here, right? So can't I just get the XHR object outside of this event listener? You think so? How about else? Anyone else think that that's true? I want to take the XHR response text, instead of me being limited to in here, right? I want to get this and I want to return it, you know, as an example out somewhere else. I want to kind of do it here, like outside of this little event listener. Is that possible? How about the gentleman over here? We have one of our ladies here says that, yes, it's possible. Come on, guys, don't be afraid. Take a shot at it. Worst case scenario, wrong. Can I or not? Okay, I'm gonna have to pick on somebody. Can I or not?
I was gonna say no.
No. Okay, so I have a yes and I have a no. How about anyone else? One more. I want one more opinion. How about yes? Yes. Yes, if. Okay. What do you say?
I'm gonna go with no. It should be
No. Why? You're right. He's right. Right? But why? Why are you right? Come on, guys. Because of the asynchronous nature of JavaScript. That's why you don't know when you're going to get your code back. Even if that object exists somewhere else, I told you you're going to hate me about this, right? It's going to only fire it back when it feels like it. And it's only going to do it here, right? Because if I try to do it out here, it may not be ready yet. I may not go through those ready states. This waits for everything to load before I get the data, right? Out here in La La Land, I don't know when I'm going to get it. But right now we're kind of trapped, right? We need something to do it, some place to put it. Okay, now this is going to get really fancy. All right. I want to use a callback function, right? That is going to be triggered, right? A callback function that's going to be triggered, right? When I get this request, I could simply return it. Here's the first thing I could do. I could say something like, okay, I don't want to do this all here. I just want to return that data somewhere else. Okay, so I could say, and it really depends on what kind of thing I want to do. If my XHR requests returns JSON, if that's what I want, JSON data, then I could reform this function and say XHR request to JSON or something like that. Or I could do something like, right? And I could also rename this XHR request to load data. How about that? Which is more friendly for us. Let's do that. How do I rejig this thing? So I could do rename symbol in Visual Studio Code, and I can just change this thing to load data, right? Load data. Right, which makes more sense. Load data. Okay, good. And we could return the data out somewhere. Like, for example, instead of us doing this like this, we could just say return And in here, we could say XHR dot and the response text, because that's the data. And then we can manipulate that in whatever we want afterwards. Correct? So when it's ready, it's going to return the data to us. When it's ready, it's going to return the data to us. Okay. Yay. That's awesome. And notice now, if I go to load data, it gives me a signature here. Look at the signature when I'm hovering over. It says local function, load data, method any, URL any, and returns void. Huh? Wait, I have a return statement right here. How come it returns void? Oh man, that means if I wanted to return something, if this fails somehow, right? Because it's going to return, sometimes it's going to return something and sometimes it's not, right? This means that the only time that this is going to return anything, right, is when I've got some data. Otherwise, if I don't get data, if I don't have data, it's going to return nothing. It's going to return void, which means there's two return possibilities here. Oh boy, right? There's two types of returns I can do. The first type of return is when I get data, I'm going to return something. It might be some kind of string. I'm going to get a string back, right? The other option is it returns null. Those are the two options, right? Null or undefined or string. Okay. Okay. Excellent. So now let's do it again. So I load my data. This returns something. Let's print it out. Let's do a console log. And I'll take this whole load data thing and I output it, right? Because it's going to return the data, right? So I should be able to do this, yeah? Should I not? Okay, predictions, programmers, developers in this room. Will it work? Will this work? Come on, guys, I want you to think about this. Your answer should be clear, not foggy at this point. Okay, who says yes, it's going to work? Let's put hands up. It's going to work. Yes, when I do this, it's going to work 100%. Who says yes? Okay, who says no? Why do you say no?
Because you're only logging the data.
That's not the answer I want. You're right, but why? But why why is it there's going to be no?
Because
I want you to say the words.
you're not showing the data.
Come on, I want you to say the words. No. Because the asynchronous nature, that's why it's the asynchronous nature of JavaScript. Let's see if I'm right. Let's see if I'm right. If I'm right, no, it's just that simple. Look, undefined. It's right here. Why is it undefined? Because why am I telling it to do? Is it going to wait? Is this return statement? Is it going to wait for me to have data? No, it's going to return immediately when I'm done. It doesn't care. It's going to return it, only when it happens. And you know what? It's not even going to get here. And because there's no return statement, it's going to return undefined. There's no return statement. Here, how about this? How would we do it like this? How do we know when this is done? We don't know, right? It's whenever the server feels like it. Whenever the server feels like it, this is going to work. So am I going to be trapped in here the entire time? No is the answer. We don't want to be trapped the entire time, right? So we could compartmentalize this thing. We could, right? And we could pass in one more thing called a callback function. We'll call it callback. And the callback is a function. That's what it is, right? The callback is a function. And we could say, instead of return, we just could say something like callback, right? And the callback function is a function. We can treat it like such. And the callback function is going to get our response, xhr.responsetext, right? So this is a way of getting out of here as an example, right? This is definitely a way. Okay, good. And then we have to make that function. So instead of us doing it like this, right? Like this, what we could say is, well, when it's done, let's reform this funky thing. There's no return type anymore, so we can't do that anymore. But what we can do is something that looks like this, where we say that the callback function is a function that looks like this. And the callback function takes in an XHR object, right? And the XHR object is going to be triggered here. We could say console log, right? And I want to print out the XHR objects, right? That's what I want to do, right? And I'm not doing any kind of parsing right now, okay? Uh-oh, man, now I'm really messing with you, right? Because I've got a function that I'm passing into a function. Do you see that? Here's a function. Here's the function itself from here to here, right? I have allocated memory and for this function. The function has reusable code, right? It's an anonymous inline function that I'm using here. Remember, this is another form that I can use. I could make this a named function too, right? Doesn't matter. I'm passing a reference to this function here inside of my callback. I'm just calling that locally for this function. It's called callback, but it's still a function, right? And then what I'm doing with that function is when I get to this, as soon as I get a proper response, I'm going to trigger that function and I'm going to pass in the XHR object to it. Now, will this work? Let's see. That works.
Mine suddenly works now.
Okay. Here's something we also want to do. I also want to document this thing a little bit, right? And one thing we can do is if you, by the way, there is an extension that I highly recommend that I want you guys to download. It's called Document This. Document This. Please download Document This, right? Document This is an extension that you can do something that looks like this, / and double asterisks. Yes?
Mine have use script at the top of my page. It's got
Yeah, of course, of course.
So we add that?
You need to have this use strict there. You need to use strict. Yeah, 'cause that's why I told you have to put it in, right? So I'll give you the code in a second, all right? But here's Document This. So Document This actually allows you to document your code, and it creates automatically, it kind of documents everything in the page itself. So here's what it can do for me, all right? If I go to app.js and I type in / and then 2 asterisks, I can choose Document This and press enter, and I get this, right? This is my comments. I can say that this function loads data asynchronously from a URL. And it calls the callback function when the data loading is complete. So this is kind of my little comments that I want to put in my code, right? Here's the parameter. Param means my method is either a get or set method. So we're going to put in here, we're going to put in here string, right? And my URL is also a string, right? And my callback is a function. Now, this is a beautiful thing. When I do this little documentation like this, right? And if I scroll down, my friends, if I scroll down to here, right, to when I call this load data, guess what I get? I get all this. I've just created a helper text for anyone who uses my little function, right? It tells me this function loads data asynchronously from a URL. It also calls a callback. It also calls the callback function when the data loading is complete. And it says param method, param URL, param callback. And what it did actually was it filled in those any's that we had before. It filled in the any's with string, and function. So if I hover over my object now, it does exactly that. It tells me instead of it, remember how I had any? Any means we don't know the type. That's what any means. Whenever you send any to TypeScript, and we're going to do that one, maybe later on, it's basically saying, I don't want to use TypeScript. TypeScript, I don't know. Any is a catch-all. It's like, if I don't know the data type, give it any, right? And that means it's going to work, right? Because it's an any type. I don't know what it is, right? Callback is a function, right? Which means I'm passing, it's one of the parameters. The parameter must be a function parameter for me to send it in, right? I'm telling you how to set up your function here. Let's save this and put it up on GitHub. So for GitHub, really quickly, here we go. I'm going to say git add dot. git commit minus M, and we'll say added contact list data source. Okay. Okay, are you with me so far? This is part of your in-class exercise. Yes. // No problem. Isn't that awesome? So that gives me really great comments. So for people who are budding developers and all that kind of stuff, you write your functions, you document your functions, and then later on, you know exactly what they have, what they're made of, what they require. Okay. 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 All right. AJAX. AJAX. That's the hard way. That's the hard way to do AJAX, right? I want to talk about jQuery, and I'm going to talk about how jQuery can make AJAX a little easier. Let's talk about what jQuery is. We already have jQuery, by the way. Remember? My node modules, when I first loaded in my index.html page, at the bottom, I have jQuery. Here it is. I kind of did that last week, right? That's my index.html page. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And we're going to time out here. I know it. The function starts. Sure. No problem. Here's the function start. So jQuery has been around for a long time. Before ECMAScript 2015, back before that, before there was HTML5 and CSS3, before there was HTTP 2.0, right? There was jQuery. It's almost like at the beginning, in the beginning, there was darkness, and now there was jQuery. Someone came up with jQuery because the jQuery library, and by the way, I'm going to show you where that is, just for your own, kind of information. If you type in jQuery and you look at it, it'll take you to jQuery.com, and it's still a library that works. You're going to see lots and lots of jQuery in your life as a developer because it's out there, right? jQuery uses a shorthand that is actually quite semantically incorrect. When you look at it, it uses a $. All right, that's the $. When you see $, in your mind, you say to yourself, "Hey jQuery." Every single time, I'm going to do it over and over again. "Hey jQuery, let's do blah blah." Right? "Hey jQuery," and the reason for this is because that's kind of what they wanted you to do. They didn't want you to work hard because, back in the day, they didn't have really great user interface, functionalities with CSS. CSS3 brought that in. Now you can do animation, you can do all kinds of stuff with CSS. And again, I talked about this last week, the CSS Zen Garden. If you guys actually look there, it's beautiful what you can do with just CSS2. Never mind CSS3, right? But CSS was a problem for developers. And so jQuery was made by developers, for developers, right, at the time, and it was a way to solve problems, right? Now we don't need jQuery as much, but let me just skip to jQuery. We did all this work together. We did all this AJAX stuff. All this stuff. It's there for you to take a look at. But here's what jQuery is. What is jQuery? jQuery is actually a little library, not that big. The footprint is pretty small, and it gives you a bunch of little shortcuts, if you will, to make things happen, right? And the way it works is something that looks like this. "Hey $, hey jQuery," and then you have something called a selector. Now you will notice if you love CSS, there's a person in the room that loves CSS, right? If you love CSS, it'll be very familiar, right? It's a way of targeting the elements in your page, just like you target them with CSS. That's why jQuery was so popular. If you know how to target elements with CSS, you know how to target elements with jQuery. "Hey jQuery, $, in parentheses and in quotations, what are you targeting?" When you target something, what jQuery returns is an array of objects that match that request. Even if there's only one object, it's always going to return an array. I want you to think about it back when Scott was teaching you. It's like query selector all. That's what this is. This is like saying, query selector all, give me everything that matches this. It's going to give you back an array every single time, okay? And this is fantastic. I put in some, syntax right here. We're not going to focus on jQuery. I'm just going to show it to you, flash it up on the screen like a flashcard, in Montessori school. Okay, that's what it is. Okay, here's flashcard, and then we're going to move on. All right. And here's some more. Here's how we can, use descendants. And again, if you're someone who loves CSS, descendant syntax, right? We can kind of go into one item and go into the other one. And I can really target that element that I want. It's going to return back an array of elements. That's what it's going to return back. This is why jQuery is powerful. But jQuery is powerful for another reason, not for this reason. And by the way, I put some selector syntax in here for you. We may look back at jQuery next week again, but I wanted to talk about what jQuery looks like really quickly. Events are super awesome with jQuery. Take a look. Hey, jQuery, connect to this selector syntax, and we use the on keyword, whatever the event type is, click, on click, then do something. That's the new way. The old way looked like this. You had an event method name. It would be something like on click, right? And then jQuery got rid of that because on click has been deprecated ever since then. You just use the on or off keyword. On means add event listener. Off means remove event listener. That's what it means, right? And so it's a shorthand for doing JavaScript, right? That's what it is. Now, we don't need it for now, right? I'm putting it out there and presenting it to you today. What we really need is our tools for AJAX, because that's where we can get dangerous with jQuery. Let's take a look at shorthand for AJAX. If we know the $ represents jQuery, we can use .get and .post. Oh yeah, right? This is really awesome what it can do. So if I do something like, hey, jQuery, I want to get this page, right, as an example, and I want to call a function upon success, this is how it looks. Hey, jQuery, I want you to get JSON from a file, and upon success, I want you to call this function. It's one thing. I don't need that complicated function I used, and I can just do jQuery like this. Let's do it. Okay, so here's an alternative to what we did. All right, alternative of this here, we're just going to comment this piece out, this little block of code. All right, we're going to keep it though. Alternative, I can say, hey, jQuery, I want you to, right? And I want you to, if I put in JSON, get JSON, and it says right there, I need the URL, right? Which is ./data/context.json, right? And upon success, when I'm done, I want you to call a success object, right? So that's what I want. So that's the data that and it says data, or if you look back here, it says whatever the function is that I want. That's also an option. So if I call the function, I can make it an anonymous function where I pass in the data, whatever that data is, right? And that data is something that I want to play with. So I can say something like, hey, jQuery, I want to console log, right? That data. Looks familiar? By the way, I coded it on purpose, just like this, right? And it's built in. You have nothing to do because I've loaded the library in there, right? Notice if I hover over, it gives me all kinds of information about the function and how it works. That's jQuery for you now. It even gives you some examples. Look, that's all the stuff that's in here. It tells you how to use it. It shows you how it works. It gives you an example of a Flickr API if you want to use Flickr. Like it's right here. It's all embedded. That's a beautiful thing, guys. jQuery has improved leaps and bounds over what it used to be. I had to look it up. I don't have to look up anything. It's right here. It's right inside my Visual Studio Code, right? So I typically avoid jQuery because I'm pretty good as a coder without it. But when it comes to AJAX, I just avoided all kinds of pain, right? I didn't do any of that work, any of those the dancing I was doing with the other functions and figuring out if it's the asynchronous nature of JavaScript. I don't have to do any of that stuff. It handles it all for me under the hood. Let's see if it works. Save and go back to this and then go to my file and see what I got. And I got this time. Look, it's an array of contact list data. It actually converted immediately into JSON, right? Now I need to know how to use it, right? How do I use this data? Well, I get a contact list back, an array of data called the contact list, right? How do I use this data? How would I do it? Data, going back to the code here, data is my data source, again, not the data. Okay, let's rename this function. So we'll go back to rename symbol. We'll call it data source, right? Let's actually do like this, data source, really explicit, okay? If I want to go to my data source and I want to type in something like contact lists, right? Then I should be able to get access to this, no? Let's see if I'm right. Save. Go back to my file here, and I get a list of objects immediately, right? And this means if I do contact lists 0, like we did before, I get the 0th object, right? That's how beautiful jQuery is. jQuery, we don't use it unless we need to. This is what can make you dangerous with jQuery, right? Because we can load JSON, or we can load HTML, or we can load whatever we want right through using jQuery. And we're going to use that when we build our own single page application, right? jQuery. One thing to know about AJAX before we go to the last piece, which is the TypeScript piece, because all I'm going to do this today is set up TypeScript for you. I was going to do the 5-page site. We just don't have time. This took a lot longer than I thought, right? You can never modify a file with AJAX, okay? It's read-only. So when we read a data source, that's all I can do with AJAX. I can't modify anything. Right? The server has to do all the modification for me, right? And unless the server is built in, unless I can send a message to the server through AJAX to tell it to modify stuff, the file that I get back is immutable. I can never change what I get, what I come back with. I can't write with AJAX to the file. I can't do that. Okay, typically, and I say that because there's always a way, and people always find interesting ways of doing it. Why would I not want to write with AJAX? Security concerns. Imagine if I can go online and on the browser, I type a little bit of jQuery, right? And I write to somebody's server. I can do that, right? I can use jQuery anywhere I want, right? It is cool, but Hamid, it's we don't need it anymore. Like I said, most of the time I can code it by myself. I can make my own little function. And back in the day, jQuery, there was nothing like jQuery. It didn't exist. You would making an XHR request was like way more complicated than this, and it was difficult to understand. And it was a function and a function and a function. Now it's not so bad, right? So we don't need it as often. jQuery is really a remnant from a prior era in web development, but there's still some cool things we can do with it. Okay. Here's something that I want to show you why it's dangerous. Look, I can do something that looks like this. I can say, hey, jQuery, right here in the browser. Hey, jQuery, I want you to, and then I can do whatever I want, right? I can target something like in the browser. Like if I know what the elements are, for example, I know that I want to target the H1 element, right? And Nicole, you're going to help me with this. Let's say, for example, I want to go, and if I look at the body, in my body, I have a div tag with a class of container, and I want to target the H1 tag like I would normally do with CSS, right? I want to change it from hello COMP2112 to hello Nicole. How would I do that? Right here in the browser. Right here in the browser. I want to do that with jQuery. So here's my selector. What's my selector syntax going to look like? I could, or I could just say, if I want to be really specific, I can say like a class of container, and inside that container class, I have an H1 tag, right? And I want to take that thing, the H1 tag that's inside the container, right? And I want to, what do I want to do? I want to change the HTML, right, to something else, right? Or the inner HTML, right? Or whatever. Now, it may not be inner HTML. We'd have to look it up. But, as an example, there's lots of little functions, right? But let's say we want to change the text. It would be the text value. I want to change the text value to, Nicole. How about that? Nicole, if I can spell it. There we go. And if I press enter, there it is. Right? I can do that anywhere. I can do that in my console. I can modify somebody's website, right, with jQuery.
So does that server side?
Oh, this is all client side. So what I'm showing you here is I have control of the client side stuff that gets sent to me by the server. I can manipulate it and play with it any way I want with jQuery, which There's another reason people don't load jQuery in their file on their site. This only works if I've loaded jQuery in my index.html file. If jQuery is not there, I can't do this. I have to do it the hard way. I have to actually do an append. I have to do like DOM manipulation with several lines of code here. I can still do it if you know what to do. This terminal is an actual terminal in your browser. You can modify anything that's on the page client side right here. Okay. Okay. Last part. Well, we don't have enough time to do everything, but this is part of your in-class exercise. I want to set up and convert our file from JavaScript to TypeScript. And this is the last part. I know we're going to run a little bit over time. Bear with me. I will continue even if you have to leave, right? It's only going to take us 5 more minutes. Okay. I want to use TypeScript. How do I do it? Let's go back. So that's wonderful, right? I did this, but I want to convert this file to TypeScript. The first thing we do when we want to convert a project to TypeScript, first of all, let's put this up on GitHub the way it is. So we'll say git commit -m, and we'll say use jQuery to fetch data. Hit push. Okay. And again, remember, you can always use my my file that I'm giving you as a base for what I'm showing you for in-class exercise. Your in-class exercise is you practicing with me. That's what it is. It's the simplest thing to do. And sometimes I'll say, okay, I've done this part. Now you do the next part. I'm not doing that today. All right. Today is like you follow along with me because I'm still building up your capability at this point. Okay. I want to add TypeScript to this whole thing. And the way to do that, the first thing we do is add a tsconfig.json file. We did the tsconfig.json file online in our playground. Remember that tsconfig? We said it's going to convert to ECMAScript 5 or ECMAScript 2022 and all these things. Here's what your TypeScript file should look like. Okay, so first thing is, let's add a new file called tsconfig.json. It's out in the open. It has to be on the root of your folder. Okay. Next, what you want to do is configure some options. So you press curly braces like this, like any other JSON file. And what I want to do is I want to do control space, and control space will give me a bunch of options to put in. The first thing we want to choose is compiler options. Right. So again, I did that by 2 curly braces in a tsconfig.json file, and then control space. Control space gives me some code hinting. You should get the same thing too. Yes. I want to choose compiler options. And in the compiler options, I want to press control space again. Control space in the compiler options. And I want to choose the target. If you chose the target, right, notice the target says ES3. If I clear that up and go control space, it'll show me all the targets. Right? Like ECMAScript 2022. I want that one. The next part is module. So if I press control space and I look at module, the module pattern is control space common.js. That's one I want to use right now. And what I also want to do is I want to use source maps. So if I do control space and I type in map, right, source maps, I want source maps to be true. That's it. That's the bare minimum that you need for TypeScript. Those 3 options, right? We're going to do other options next week, right? This basically tells the compiler, when we start running the compiler, that TypeScript is going to compile from TypeScript to JavaScript ES 2022. That's what it's going to do. And for now, there's going to be no difference with what we have, right? Let me show you how the compilation process works. In your scripts, let's rename our app.js into app.ts. So again, F2 to rename. And we can go down here and choose app.ts. Immediately when we do that, when we do an app.ts, if I look inside my app.ts, there might be some underscores for here to let you know there's some problems. Here's something. Method, it says type any again. And same thing with load data. Load data says it should be strings and so on, but it doesn't do it. For TypeScript, we can actually put the type string. Our URL is of type string. Our callback is of type function. Our return type, right, is of type void. Function does not compute. it wants me to put function capital F, right? See that underscore? That red underscore? So that's load data. Now load data I'm not using, right? But how about XHR? It tells you it's an XML HTTP request. And if you hover over, it gives you so much code hinting like you've never had before, right? That's what TypeScript does for you. It tells you a pile of information, right? Like this, right? So it tells you these are numbers. It tells you that what this callback is, that it's a function, right? TypeScript is amazing when it comes to this kind of stuff. And it doesn't like this. Look at this. It says $. I don't know what you mean by $. Remember what we said in the beginning when we have our, project dependencies and we have our dev dependencies? We need to add a dev dependency to help us out. So let's save this. Let's save this. And in our, here inside of our console, last thing we're going to do today, just to make this work, right? So all I want to do is I'm going to clear the screen and I'm going to type in yarn add, here we go, at types jQuery --dev. And what yarn, remember yarn? Hey, package manager, I have a verb, add. Yarn, add, give me something. Yarn is going to go out to the web and grab a type definition file for jQuery. That's what we have to do. Anytime we want a TypeScript to understand a new library, we have to get the type definition file and include it in our project as a dev dependency, okay? If I do that and press enter, it's going to grab this type definition file and put it inside of our package.json. Here's our package.json. Take a look. There it is. So now we have jQuery as a dependency and jQuery as a dev dependency. And notice that the versions are slightly different. Your dev dependency is actually a little bit behind the actual API. Sometimes this happens because someone is writing it. There's a person out there that wrote this type definition library. Some person, we don't know who. It's in the community. All right, cool. That's good. If I go back to my app.ts now we know what jQuery is. Hey, now we know it's jQuery. And it doesn't give me that little underline anymore. It's automatic, right? And here's my stuff. It still gives me the same information, but it gives me more information. It gives me more than ever, right? For all this stuff. So if I hover over, it tells me a bunch of stuff. In order for this to turn green, because tsconfig.json says it turned green, I need to transpile for the first time. The way I transpile is I need to press inside of Visual Studio Code, Control-Shift-B for build. Control-Shift-B, let's do it. And this is the last thing we'll do, Control-Shift-B. Control-Shift-B will bring up this little taskbar. Did you guys get this? You choose the watch task, not the build task, the watch task. And when you choose the watch task by selecting it, what it's going to do is it's going to build your app for the first time. Okay, that's what it's going to do. And what it did was it generated an app.js file for you right here. And take a look, right? Tell me, and I'm just going to do one of these for a second. Tell me, right, in your, this is the app.js, does it look any different than the other one? Yes, it does. It has this, it might have some dreaded keywords like var if we were transferring it, but this looks identical, doesn't it? Identical, because we haven't done anything. We don't have a special thing. We've been using JavaScript from the very beginning, and so it converted over. What was lost was all the data types. Look, the data types have been stripped away. We added them in the app.ts here, right? Because TypeScript needs them, right? It doesn't want you to define things that are non-defined, right? But here in the app.js, it strips them away because remember, it converts to real JavaScript at the end of the day. Does this make sense? Okay. So that is the conversion process, right? Should I add the library to my files? No, you have to do it through Yarn. That's how you do it, Hamid. Follow last week's thing. All right, so now that we have TypeScript, right? What's the difference? Why do we do all this stuff? I did it to prepare you for what's happening next week, when everything we do from now on is with TypeScript. We're not going to use just vanilla JavaScript anymore. We're going to layer TypeScript on top of it. I want you for the rest of the semester, after this semester, Everything we do is TypeScript. For your in-class exercise 2, please include this part. Convert your app.js to an app.ts and make sure there are no red lines. Red lines mean something is missing. And that is your in-class exercise number 2. Let's put this up on GitHub so you have an example of what I did, and you can compare my code to your code, which is totally okay. So let's put this up, and that's it for the day. Git add dot, git commit -m. We'll say converted to TypeScript. If you followed along, that's the URL that you submit to. You're ready to submit your in-class exercise 2. You're done, right? If you followed along, there's no little movie or video required. Yes.
Yes.
Transpile. Control-Shift-B and make sure it'll go away.
Yeah.
No, if you did it, just give it a second. It will go away. It'll fix itself. Sorry? Yeah, here's my TS config. That's it for me, guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording now, and then hopefully that'll be enough for you to do your stuff for your in-class exercise 2. Thank you. And also please look for your assignment 1, which will be a very simple TypeScript kind of site that you're going to use. You're going to make a 5-page site with TypeScript, very simple, right? And we're going to get you to load some stuff up from a file, which is interesting. Okay. So here it is. I'm just going to put this up on, I'm going to stop streaming now, and I'll answer the questions in the room. I'm not sure if those people are waiting for us. Hopefully not.